My son was drowning in depression, and I was too busy being successful to notice. For 17 years, I thought I was being a good father. I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure he had everything I never had growing up. Private school, nice clothes, his own car when he turned 16, college fund that would cover any university he wanted to attend. I thought providing was the same thing as parenting. I thought success as a father meant making sure my son never wanted for anything. What I didn't realize was that the one thing he wanted most was the one thing I wasn't giving him: my time, my attention, my presence. His name is Marcus, named him after my grandfather, a man who worked with his hands his whole life, but always had time to sit on the porch and listen to whatever was on your mind. Funny how I honored his name, but forgot his example. Marcus was always a quiet kid. Even as a baby, he didn't cry much. As a toddler, he'd play by himself for hours, building elaborate worlds with his toys, lost in his imagination. I used to brag about how easy he was, how independent, how he never bothered me when I was working from home. Looking back, I realized those weren't signs of independence. They were signs of a child learning not to need his father because his father was never available to be needed. When he started school, the teachers always said the same thing: that Marcus is a pleasure to have in class, very bright, very well behaved, keeps to himself. I took that as a good thing. No trouble calls from school meant I was raising him right, didn't it? But what I didn't understand was that keeps to himself was code for something else. It was code for a child who had learned that reaching out didn't get results, so he stopped reaching. The signs were there for years, but I was too busy climbing ladders and closing deals to read them properly. When he was in middle school, his grades started slipping. Not dramatically, he went from A's to B's and C's. When I asked him about it, he'd shrug and say, I don't know, I guess I'm just not that smart. Instead of sitting down with him, instead of asking deeper questions, instead of really listening to what he was telling me, I hired a tutor. Problem solved, right? Throw money at it, delegate it to someone else. Move on to the next fire that needed putting out. The tutor helped his grades, but it didn't help him because grades weren't really the problem. The problem was that my son was disappearing inside himself and I was too distracted to notice. High school came and things got worse. He quit the soccer team after 2 weeks, said he didn't like it anymore. He stopped hanging out with friends. When I asked him why kids never came over anymore, he said they were all fake anyway. He spent more and more time in his room, door closed, headphones on. I told myself this was normal teenage behavior. Boys go through phases. He'll grow out of it. Besides, he wasn't getting in trouble, wasn't doing drugs, wasn't failing school. What more could I ask for? What I could have asked for was a real conversation with my son. What I could have asked for was to understand what was happening in his heart, in his mind, behind that closed bedroom door. But I was traveling 3 weeks out of every month, building my business, chasing opportunities, networking with people who could help me get to the next level. When I was home, I was tired, dealing with emails, preparing for the next trip. How was school? I'd ask him over dinner. Fine, he'd answer. Any homework? Already did it. And that was the extent of our daily communication. I thought that was enough. I thought checking the box of talk to my son was the same as actually connecting with him. His mother, we'd been divorced since he was 8, started calling me with concerns. Something's wrong with Marcus, she'd say. He's different, darker. He barely talks to me either, but I see him every day and I'm worried. He's a teenager, I'd tell her. They're all moody. He's fine. But he wasn't fine. And deep down, I think I knew that. I think I chose not to see it because seeing it would have required me to do something about it. And doing something about it would have meant admitting that my priorities were wrong. The wake-up call came on a Thursday night in October. I was in Dallas closing a deal that had been 6 months in the making. Biggest contract of my career, the kind of success I'd been working toward for years. I was in my hotel room celebrating with my team when my phone rang. It was Marcus's mother and she was crying. "You need to come home," she said, "right now." My blood went cold. What happened? Is he hurt? Was there an accident? "I found him in the bathroom," she said, her voice breaking. There was blood and pills and a note. The room started spinning. He's alive. We're at the hospital, but you need to come home right now." I hung up and immediately called my assistant to book the next flight out. My business partners were confused. We were supposed to celebrate, supposed to sign papers in the morning, supposed to close the deal that would set me up for the next decade. "This can wait until tomorrow," one of them said. "We've come this far. Let's finish what we started." And for a moment, God forgive me. I actually considered it. For one horrible moment, I weighed the importance of a business deal against my son's life. That's how lost I was. That's how far I'd fallen from being the father my son needed. I caught the red-eye flight and spent 6 hours in that airplane seat, replaying every conversation, every missed sign, every moment when I chose work over him. I thought about the note his mother mentioned and wondered what it said. I wondered if he blamed me. I wondered if I was too late. When I got to the hospital, I found him in a small room, sleeping. His wrists were bandaged, and he looked so young, so fragile lying there. His mother was in the chair beside his bed, eyes red from crying. "The note," I whispered. "What did it say?" She handed me a crumpled piece of paper, and I recognized his handwriting immediately. The same careful letters he'd used on homework assignments I'd barely glanced at. On birthday cards I'd thanked him for, but never really read. It said, "I know everyone thinks I have everything, but I feel empty all the time. Like there's a hole where something important should be, but I don't know what. I try to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to matter, but nothing I do seems to matter to anyone. Especially Dad. I know he loves me, but I don't think he likes me very much. I don't think he enjoys being around me. I'm tired of feeling invisible in my own life. Maybe if I'm gone, at least I'll matter enough for people to notice." I read those words over and over until they blurred through my tears. My son, my 17-year-old boy, felt invisible. In his own life, with his own father, he felt invisible. How had I failed him so completely? The doctor came in an hour later and explained that Marcus had taken an overdose of pain medication he'd found in the medicine cabinet, then used a razor blade on his wrists. If his mother hadn't come home early from work, if she hadn't found him when she did, I couldn't finish that thought. "The good news," the doctor said, "is that physically he's going to be fine. But we need to talk about what happens next. He's going to need counseling, support, a comprehensive treatment plan for his depression." "Depression?" I said. "He's not depressed. He's going through a rough patch." The doctor looked at me with something between pity and frustration. "Mr. Harvey, your son has been suffering from clinical depression for what appears to be several years. The signs have been there: social withdrawal, declining academic performance, loss of interest in activities, persistent sadness, feelings of worthlessness. This didn't happen overnight. Several years." The words hit me like a physical blow. My son had been suffering for years, and I hadn't noticed. I'd been living in the same house with him, seeing him every day when I was in town, and I'd missed it completely. When Marcus woke up, I was alone with him. His mother had gone to get coffee, and it was just the two of us in that quiet hospital room. He looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than 17. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Sorry?" I said, moving my chair closer to his bed. "Son, you have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who's sorry. I didn't mean to mess up your trip." That sentence broke something inside me. Even after everything, even lying in a hospital bed after trying to take his own life, he was worried about inconveniencing me. "Marcus, look at me," I said, taking his hand. "There is no trip, no deal, no business, no success in this world that matters more than you. Nothing. Do you understand me? And he started crying then, and I realized it was the first time I'd seen him cry since he was a little boy. All those years of keeping it together, of being the easy kid, of not bothering Dad with his problems, it all came pouring out. "I just wanted you to be proud of me," he said between sobs. "I wanted to be good enough for you to want to spend time with me. But nothing I did ever seemed to matter to you." I climbed up on that hospital bed and held my son like I hadn't held him since he was small. I held him and let him cry, and I cried too, for all the years I'd wasted, all the moments I'd missed, all the signs I'd ignored. "You've always been good enough," I told him. "You've always mattered. I just forgot how to show you that, but I'm going to learn. We're going to figure this out together." The next few months were the hardest and most important of my life. I took a leave of absence from work, something I never thought I'd do, to focus on Marcus's recovery and our relationship. We went to counseling together individually and as a family. I learned about depression, about how it affects teenagers, about how a young man's sense of self-worth is often tied to his father's approval and attention. I learned that success as a parent isn't measured by how much you provide financially, but by how present you are emotionally. I learned that children don't need perfect fathers. They need available fathers. They need fathers who show up, who listen, who ask questions and actually care about the answers. I learned that my son wasn't quiet because he was independent. He was quiet because he learned that speaking up didn't get him what he needed most: connection with his dad. We started having real conversations, not the how was school, fine exchanges we'd been having for years, but actual discussions about his thoughts, his fears, his dreams, his struggles. I learned that he was passionate about music, that he'd been writing songs for years but never shared them because he didn't think I'd be interested. I learned that he'd had crushes on girls but never talked about them because he didn't think I had time for that kind of conversation. I learned that he'd been struggling with anxiety about his future, about college, about whether he was smart enough or good enough or strong enough to succeed. All these things had been happening in his life, and I'd missed all of it because I was too busy building a career to build a relationship with my son. The therapy helped, but what helped more was time, real time, focused time, time when I wasn't thinking about work or checking my phone or mentally preparing for the next meeting, time when my only job was to be his father. We started going to breakfast together once a week, just the two of us. No agenda, just talking. We went to concerts together, his choice of music, not mine. We took long drives where we'd listen to the songs he'd written and talk about what inspired them. Slowly, I watched him come back to life. The light returned to his eyes. He started hanging out with friends again, started showing interest in things that had nothing to do with impressing me or anyone else. He started therapy with a counselor who specialized in teen depression, and he started taking medication that helped balance the chemical imbalances in his brain. But most importantly, he started believing that he mattered, not because of what he achieved or how he performed, but because he was my son, and that was enough. Today, Marcus is 22. He's in college, studying music production, following a dream I almost never knew he had. He's healthy, he's happy, and we have the relationship I always should have had with him. But I'll never forget those words in his note. Maybe if I'm gone, at least I'll matter enough for people to notice. The thought that my son believed he had to die to matter to me will haunt me for the rest of my life. But it also saved our relationship because it forced me to confront the truth about my priorities. You can build the most successful business in the world, but if you lose your children in the process, you haven't succeeded at anything that matters. You can provide everything for your family except the one thing they need most: you. If you have children, if you have people in your life who look up to you, who need you, who love you, don't assume they know how much they matter to you. Don't assume that providing for them is the same as being present with them. Ask them questions, real questions. Listen to their answers. Really listen. Show up for the things that matter to them, even if those things don't seem important to you. Make time for conversations that have nothing to do with grades or chores or responsibilities, because your children don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. They need to know that they matter more than your work, more than your success, more than anything else you're building. Don't wait for a phone call from the hospital to realize that the most important job you'll ever have is being their parent. Your career will end someday. Your achievements will be forgotten. But the relationship you build with your children, that's forever. That's the legacy that actually matters. Don't let your success cost you the people you're succeeding for.